All right, hello, everybody. Lovely to be back involved on another monthly chat. So yeah, today we are talking a little bit about hip flexors and sore hip flexors after long hikes, which was a specifically requested topic. It is a pretty common issue that a lot of people struggle with. So we're going to be diving into this in a little bit of detail. For today, this presentation, I don't think it's probably going to be quite as long as usual. I'm usually like right up to the end point. I didn't squeeze quite as much in as usual. So if anyone does have any questions off this as I go through, or if there's anything else you kind of want me to cover today, just plug it in chat as we go through. Just because this topic's obviously pretty specific, but if there's anything else you kind of want me to cover while we're here, I'll try my best. So let me share my screen and I'll pull up my presentation and we will get into it all. So basically preventing sore hip flexors on long hikes. Very common thing. It's a super common issue for so many hikers and walkers out there. And I think, 75% of people probably get this at one stage or another. Really common. For some people, this can be kind of on the scale of just being uncomfortable and just not a huge amount of fun. And, it's not something we really want to deal with. For others, if it's sort of an ongoing thing and it kind of keeps on just getting aggravated and it just never seems to get better, it can sometimes just get a little bit worse. If you're actually out on your trip and you're sort of like out, having an adventure and this and that, it can sort of lead to, okay, I got my sore hip flexors while I was hiking, which wasn't much fun. I finished up hiking and now I have to hop in a Jeep or hop on a plane or hop on a bus for ages, and we end up cramped up and it can end up just cramping. It just doesn't end up much fun, which sucks. Or, on the far end of the scale can potentially lead to some overuse injuries. So things like just repetitive strain injury or, hip issues or whatever it may be. I wouldn't sort of say that's always the case or even often the case when we're just getting this soreness, but it can potentially happen. So today we're going to be diving into a little bit of details around how you can prevent this. We're going to start with just what the hip flexors are, just in case you're not aware. We're going to talk about why they so commonly get sore on longer hikes. We're going to talk it through 3 simple areas of training that you can use to prevent sore hip flexors, and then just some simple ideas around how you can manage this when it actually happens on your adventure. So starting off, what are the hip flexors? Now, we've all heard of the hip flexors before, I'm sure. Everyone talks about it in the fitness industry. Basically, the hip flexors is just a group of muscles in the front of the hip and the upper thigh. There's a few different muscles going on here and lots of different muscles that are kind of responsible for this movement, but they're typically just the front of the hips is sort of what we're talking about here. Now, these muscles are mainly responsible for, it's in the name, flexing the hip. So basically raising the knee up is hip flexion, and that's kind of what they're responsible for there. Why do the hip flexors get pretty sore on longer hikes? Well, they just do a lot of work while we're hiking. Realistically, step after step after step, do a lot of work. When we're going up hills, do a lot of work. When we're carrying a pack on our back, does extra work. When we're going quick, does extra work. The hip flexors do a lot of work on the trail. We often think about our bigger muscles, our quads, our hamstrings, our glutes doing all of this work, which are very important to develop and get ready. But the hip flexors, a little bit smaller, but they still do quite a bit. Now, general rule of thumb when it comes to aches and pains for the trail, and this is specifically for hip flexors, but also pretty much aches and pains as well, if the body has not been properly exposed to the challenges that it's going to face on the trail, it can lead to aches and pains. Pretty simple. Basically what that means is if you are doing your training, doing your everyday life, and you're exposing the body to certain things, then you get out on your hike and you get out on your adventure, whether it's a training hike or whether it's your big adventure, and the body gets exposed to things that it just hasn't had before, or not to the extent that it has before. This typically leads those areas just get a little bit overworked, get a little bit overly fatigued. That can lead to aches and pains. General rule of thumb. Not only for hip flexors, same rule of thumb for your feet, for your ankles, for your knees, for your back, all of this stuff. Very common. Now, in the situation of the hip flexors, this can happen if we are underprepared for specific things like hiking distances. So if you haven't quite worked up to the necessary distances or times in your training, and you sort of only hike up to 4 hours or 5 hours, and then all of a sudden you have to do 7 hours on your adventure, this can sometimes just lead to a little bit of a gap, and the hip flexors can sometimes pay the price. This can happen in speed, so hip flexors do a big role when we are going a bit quicker. So if you've been training at your normal pace and you realize that, hey, I'm a bit of a slower hiker, and then all of a sudden you go on your group and go out on your trip, and you try to keep it at the front of the pack who's a little bit quicker, that can lead to this sort of discomfort. Pack weight, again, like, if you're just not used to the pack weight, this can sort of lead into the issue. Same thing with elevation. If you're not used to going up and down hills or stairs, this can lead to it. So all of these really specific things that we face on a hiking trail, realistically, if we're just a little bit underprepared in these situations, this is kind of what's happening with the hip flexors and why they're getting sore. So ultimately, to prevent sore hip flexors on the trail, we want to, number one, expose them to the specific demands they will face on your adventures. And also number two, build up strength and endurance in these muscles. So this isn't so much specific training, but this is just targeting on those hip flexors to get them a little bit more comfortable with whatever they're faced on the trail or off the trail. And we're going to talk about how to go about this. So you may notice that I've sort of mentioned exposing the hip flexors to specific demands and building up strength and endurance. You may be thinking right now, what about stretching? And you may have noticed that, hey, Rowan actually didn't mention stretching or mobility here. And the fitness industry, when it comes down to it, and loves talking about tight hip flexors. And probably 98% of people watching this presentation has probably been told they suffer from this before, because it's such a common thing in the modern day. We sit down all day, hip flexors get a little bit tight, they get a little bit restricted. Tightness is a pretty common thing. And yeah, this is a really, really common thing. But while tight hip flexors are probably something that's worthwhile working on, and it's probably worthwhile if they are tight to do a bit of stretching, do a bit of mobility work and this and that. But when we're talking about this specific context and specifically talking about sore hip flexors on the trail, mobility, flexibility, it's probably beneficial for some reasons, but it's probably not the priority for this. Realistically, if we're trying to reduce this soreness, it's probably going to be coming from strength and endurance and exposure in this context of hiking. So that's kind of where we're coming from here. Now, stretching mobility will probably fall into the management side of things. So we're going to be talking about prevention and management today. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But when we're talking about prevention, probably not one of the major priorities. So let's talk about exposure. So when preparing for adventure, basically general rule of thumb, we should always know how long we need to be hiking for. Are we going to be hiking on a longest day for 4 hours or 5 hours or 6 hours? We probably want to know this pretty early on in our training. We generally want to know what pack weight we need to be carrying. And ideally some rough speed requirements. Like this obviously isn't always going to be possible, but having a rough idea around, okay, do I have to set a cracking pace to get through this, which probably not in your Camino Women adventures is going to have, but if you're doing other adventures in the future, there may be certain pace requirements, or there may even just be certain pace requirements just a little bit quicker than what you're used to. It's not always possible to get this, but having a rough idea can be good. Now, first and foremost, when we're coming up in our training plan, we want to ensure that we are coming up with a training plan which is going to cover all of these things. We talked about this on these presentations quite a few times around putting together a hiking plan to build up to this type of stuff. Essentially, you want to come up with a plan in a nutshell which will slowly and gradually build up your hiking distance and pack weight to the equivalent targets of your adventure. So your end goal, just before you head off on your adventure, if your longest day on your trip is 6 hours and the heaviest pack weight you have to carry is 5 kilos, you want to make sure that at least once in your training, you've done a 6-hour hike with a 5 kilo pack weight. That's main priority. We've already done that. On top of that, if possible, you want to be able to incorporate speeds which are relatively close to what you may need for your adventure. And obviously, again, this is a little bit tricky to know exactly, but if you can get a rough idea of like, okay, you're looking at your trip notes and it sort of says, okay, you're probably going to be going for, I don't know, these numbers are going to be wrong, but let's sort of say 15 kilometers in a day. And you're probably going to be expected to be on your feet for 6 hours or something like that. You can kind of do some rough maths and be like, all right, roughly I need to hike, I'm not even going to try, however many kilometers per hour and roughly be around about that. Those numbers were probably completely off, but like that's the general gist. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I've done this in a couple of other presentations. I think I even did a presentation a little while ago. It was like planning your hiking training or whatever. It was one of the first 2 or 3 we did. So if you haven't seen that one, maybe go on the Camino Women website, check that one out because it goes into a particular process around how to do it. Now, realistically, if you do this plan right, if you put together a plan that slowly but surely builds you up with distance and pack weight and slowly exposes you to that, and you do it over time and gradually do this consistently, probably this is going to be solve 90% of people's issues, because usually what happens is those sore hip flexors appear when we either haven't hiked in a while, or we do a big jump up in pack weight or distance, or a big jump up in speed. So if we can eliminate those things through this training, it's probably going to solve about 90% of people's issues in that. Very, very simple, but very, very effective. Now, next up, we want to talk about strength. So that's our specific exposure. And as I said, that's very, very important. Then we want to talk about strength and endurance. Now, strength is essentially the kind of maximal force that a muscle can produce. And essentially developing this maximal force that a muscle can produce can just help it feel a bit more comfortable in certain situations, reduce fatigue, and make all our movements just feel a little bit easier. So specifically aiming at building some very, very particular strength in your hip flexors, if you struggle with this, can often be quite helpful here. Now, a lot of people will sort of think about, okay, how do I actually work the hip flexors? Because we often think about squats and step ups and lunges and all of this stuff, which is really, really good for the bigger muscles. For the hip flexors, none of those exercises are really going to do a huge amount for that. They may be working a little bit, but it's not going to do a huge amount. Realistically, if we're going to go hip flexors, we kind of want to target in a little bit more. And this can be really, really simple. Now, first example here is very, very, very straightforward. Essentially, what you can do is just get like a mini band, like a TheraBand or an exercise band or something like that, and you're literally just standing upright. You can hold on to something for balance for this, whatever it may be. And literally, first position that I often get a lot of people to do is literally this. They'll have a band, they'll hold this position, they'll bring their knee up to about 90 degrees, and just hold this for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds at a time. Again, you may be wobbling around a little bit so you can hold on to something, but this works out pretty well. What you'll notice is in the front of the hip, which is the hip flexor, will be locking on to try to hold that knee, fight that resistance, and stop pulling down. This can be a really, really simple thing to start with, but it can be very, very effective. Now, once you've done that for a few weeks, another option is basically turn that into a bit of a dynamic move. So instead of just holding the position, we turn into a bit of a march. So we're holding onto something for balance. Again, we've got the band around the knees, and we'll literally just bring the knee up and down, up and down, up and down. Very, very simple. And literally, you could sort of look at an 8-week training program like this. You could do 4 weeks of that holding for like 20 seconds one week, 30 seconds the next week, 40 seconds the next week, 50 seconds the next week, and then you could do 4 weeks of this and just add on a few extra repetitions. That in itself, it won't take you too long, but it can go a long, long, long way. Now, again, I'm not going to go too much into the specifics around putting together strength workouts and how to use this and how to incorporate this, because we'll be talking about this forever. As I typically mention, as I do mention on each of these presentations, if you are interested in strength training for hiking, and if you're like, hey, those exercises are cool, but how does that come into the broader picture? How do I actually put together workouts and tick off all the other things I need? If you're interested in that topic and you're not quite sure how to go about that, I've got a free little mini course which kind of teaches you how to go this. Inside the course, it basically teaches you the benefits of strength training for hiking. So we're talking about the hip flexors today, but there are a lot of extra larger benefits for this type of stuff. We also talk about the principles of effective strength training, so how to make the most of this type of training, and also teaches you how to create your own strength workouts. And essentially, it'll give you some templates, some ideas around how you can actually put together your own strength workouts, and then you can even just take these exercises and plug them into those templates very, very simply. If you want to sign up, it is completely free. You can go to summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course. On that page, basically, you can sign up, get it for free, get access, and put together your own workouts. So that's the strength side of things. Now, on the endurance side of things, essentially endurance, the difference between strength and endurance. Strength is kind of the more maximal level of force our muscles can produce. Endurance is the ability of your muscles to produce a moderate amount of force, but repeatedly. So just go again and again and again and again. Now, one of the tricky things when we come to endurance training is quite often if we've been in the fitness world, in the fitness environment, or we've gone to the gym, quite often people talk about endurance training in the gym environment by doing 15 repetitions of something or 20 repetitions of something, and they classify that as endurance, which makes sense in the gym context. But in the hiking context, if we just did that for our endurance training, we went out and did an exercise and did 15 repetitions of something and then went out and hike, it can sometimes leave us a little bit short, because in the hiking context, endurance can be dozens and hundreds of steps going up a hill. It can just be going for minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes. So there's a little bit of a difference. So essentially, when we're looking at endurance training for hiking, we kind of want to sort of think about, okay, how can we be specific about the demands of hiking and replicate that again and again and again? So ways we can develop specific endurance in the hip flexors for hiking is very, very simple. And this literally falls into some of the most common and beneficial training workouts for hikers anyway. Doing things like stair or hill sessions, where literally just you find a nice long set of stairs, a nice long hill, and you just practice going up and down, up and down, up and down. Now on the down portion, the hip flexors won't do a huge amount, but on the up portion, you'll be getting that. You'll be lifting the knee, lifting the knee, lifting the knee, doing those little movements all the way up, all the way down. Now, not only is this going to be really beneficial for your hip flexors, but also for a ton of other things in your hiking. It's great for cardio, great for working your other muscles, great for specific exposure, really, really good. Or if you don't have access to a stair or hill, you could do some step sessions where you get a nice small box. You can use like a, a bench at a park, or like an aerobic step or something like that. And you can literally step up and down, up and down, up and down. And again, we're lifting that knee up, down, and doing this for extended periods. You might step up and down for 4 minutes, have a minute rest, 4 minutes on, 1 minute off, and do that 5 or 6 times, or whatever it may be. And that in itself, very, very simple, but it can go a long way for this. Now, to make this a little bit more specific, then we kind of want to think about, okay, these sessions can be really, really good to start. Then we kind of want to think about, okay, how do we make this a little bit more particular? So we're aware that, okay, the pack weight can be a bit of a challenge for the hip flexors. So maybe we'll do these sessions and we'll slowly build up a little bit of pack weight. So as we're lifting those knees and as we're lifting those legs, it's a little bit harder. So those hip flexors get that exposure. On top of that, another really important thing is doing the same footwear. So if you do all your training in a pair of sneakers and then you go out and hike in a pair of boots, they may not be dramatically different in weight, but there will be a decent difference. And you'll notice if you're doing hundreds of steps going up and up and up and up in something that's even a tiny little bit different weight, that can often be a trigger for the hip flexors. So essentially, if you're doing these sessions, this is a really good place where you can actually put on your boots, if you're wearing boots, or put on your footwear, whatever you are, so the body can get used to lifting those shoes for those steps. Very, very, very effective. So on the prevention side of things, it is very, very straightforward for this. Like, a lot of this stuff will just fall into other areas of good preparation and good training. But if you are struggling with this type of thing, making sure you're following that hiking plan, maybe a little bit of specific strengthening, and then fitting those endurance sessions, 99% of the time, that's going to sort you out. Just make sure you've got that plan in place, make sure you do a bit of targeted strengthening and make it a little bit harder for yourself over time, and make sure you're fitting some of that specific endurance work in. It'll really go a long way. So that's the prevention side of things. It's not too rocket science. It's just a case of doing the right things and consistently applying it. Beyond prevention, that type of stuff can take a little while to kick into effect. Beyond prevention, what can you actually do if you do get sore hip flexors? Whether right now, while you're putting that training into effect and you're going out on your training hikes, you're like, it's a little bit uncomfortable. Or if you're actually out on the trip and you've done all your training and then all of a sudden out on the trip, this comes back, which sometimes does happen because pain is a complicated thing. And as much as we can prepare for it, sometimes there's just a ton of other factors which can lead to flare-ups or aggravations. So if you do get in a situation where you do have sore hip flexors, what can you do? Well, a few really, really simple things. Number one, very, very, very effective, is a little bit of self-massage. So essentially, I'm sure we've all had a massage at one point or another where someone's really gotten into our muscles and done this. And it can feel great, it can be lovely, and very, very relaxing. For ourselves on the trail, obviously we don't have a masseuse around, probably not going to be asking our hiking partners to do this, but you can do a little bit of self-massage on sore areas. Essentially, you can get your thumbs into your hip flexors. You can get the handle if you have got a trekking pole and you can kind of dig your hip flexors in, dig your trekking pole in. I thought I had a water bottle here, or you can even get a water bottle and kind of get the corner of your water bottle. And essentially what you want to do, get it, find those hip flexors, find the bit that's quite sore, and then basically just dig into it. If you've got your thumbs right now, you can probably dig around and find that area that's there. You may have to do some little circles to work through any kind of if you've got a little bit of, if it's a little bit hard to get to, just do a little circles till you can dig in. You can probably feel it right now. And then essentially what you do is just push into it, and then essentially just some slow, gentle circles. Whether your thumbs or the trekking pole or the water bottle, just sort of slowly circling around. And then essentially just to add a little bit more to it, as you're circling around, you want to think about big breaths in, big breaths out. Big breaths in, big breaths out. And each time you breathe out, we want to just put a little bit more pressure on. So if it's really, really sore the first time you do it, you might be like, oh, I've got my thumb in there and it's like quite tight. So then you just do some gentle circles, take a big breath in, hold it for a second, and then breathe out. And then as you breathe out, you'll notice it gets a little bit more relaxed. So then you kind of put a bit more pressure in and you can work with this. Now, the self-massage, very, very simple to apply. You can do this at the end of your days and just do 2 or 3 minutes of this. You can do this at your lunch breaks. You can do this even when you're just having a drink stop or whatever it may be. This type of stuff, it's probably not going to fix the issue in the long term because that's what the prevention side of things is doing, but this can be really, really nice as self-management. Now, the other side of things is stretching. Self-massage is great. Stretching can also be great as well. So basically they're two sides of the same coin. They'll do a very similar thing, but slightly differently. So sometimes combining the two can work really, really well. This is a nice little hip flexor stretch that I quite like, which can be quite accessible both at home and on the trail. Basically what you're going to do is you're just going to start with 1 foot forward, 1 knee down. If you're out on the trail, obviously you want to do some grass or something that's nice or whatever it may be, that's not too uncomfortable in the knee. And then basically what you're going to do, you're going to set yourself up, get your pelvis nice and sorted. And then from here, you're going to make sure this glute here, so your bum muscle here, you're going to squeeze that on nice and tight. And this will really, really make sure that like we get into the area that we want. So squeeze the muscle on. Then essentially from there, you're just going to lean forward slightly while keeping that glute squeezed on, and you will feel a bit of a stretch down here. If your hip flexors are tight, you will feel that pretty quickly. And essentially it'll just be, a little bit of tightness there. Then essentially what we want to do is just big arms up and then down. And as your arms come up, you will notice the stretch gets a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So you may want to time an exhale as you come going out. And essentially you just work through this. You might do 10 of these or 15 of these. And again, just really, really feeling like it releases and comes off. A really good combination is literally just doing 2 minutes of that self-massage and then doing maybe 10 or 15 of these immediately after. That can work really well. Even little doses of just doing a few repetitions if you get the opportunity can often help, but that can work pretty well. And then the third thing that I quite like on the trail is using some magnesium spray. Now this is a really cool product which I really like. I just keep this in my pack when I go hiking or even on holidays. Magnesium itself is like a muscle relaxant. So we've often sort of seen magnesium powder or magnesium pills or whatever it may be, and as a muscle relaxant. Now magnesium spray is essentially just magnesium in a spray form. So the beautiful thing about this is if you take a pill or a powder, it'll kind of affect the whole body. It'll be nice, it'll helpful, but it sometimes doesn't give us that quick relief and it doesn't target the areas so much. The spray is really nice that we can just target particular areas that are sore, particular areas that are tight, particular areas that may be cramping, and it can give us some pretty quick relief. I quite like just keeping it in my pack. Like you can kind of like, there's little bottles here, like you can get bottles like this for like, like $30 or $35 or something, which will last you a long time. I think my last bottle lasted me like 6 or 7 months, and I just sort of use that use that before bed, and I quite liked it. You can get little bottles as well, which can be quite nice to bring in your pack. And basically they'll only weigh a very small amount, and it can be quite useful. Like there's lots and lots of brands out there. Like the stuff I use is like Salt Lab. You can't really see here, S-A-L-T Lab. I use them purely for the fact that I can think they're like the first one that I came across, but there's lots of brands out there these days. I'm pretty sure they all do the same thing. So you can just go onto Google and just type in magnesium spray, and they can be really, really useful. I quite like this for on the trail. Can be quite nice as just day to day if you get like restless legs or sore muscles, and it can be quite nice just before bed as well as a bit of a sleep aid. So it's a nice bang for your buck. The only thing to sort of say is if you do get this, just test it out first. First of all, like they usually come with instructions around how to try it out, because sometimes some people will use it the first time and it'll just be a little bit intense for them, and they'll get like little burny on the skin as opposed to relaxing. So just test it out, follow the instructions they give you. They teach you how to dilute it if you need. But yeah, it can be pretty cool, and I really do like this product for a lot of people. Now, wrapping up, realistically, a lot of the stuff we covered is not rocket science, and a lot of the stuff we covered is actually big crossovers in what we've talked about in other presentations. And realistically, if you follow a structured and well-rounded program, it's probably going to cover most of the bases we talked about today. And then you may just want to add in some of that specific strengthening, and then you may want to add on some of that management stuff, sort you out pretty well. So hopefully now you know kind of what you can be doing, and hopefully that can make a bit of a difference for a few people. Now, with all that being said, as I always sort of say at the end of these presentations, hopefully this does give you a bit of an overview of things, but I fully understand that, sometimes putting this all together can be a little bit tricky. And if you are in a position where you're like, look, I've got a big trip coming up, I kind of do want a bit of help with my training, I would love to chat with you. What I do all day, every day is I do personalized training programs for hikers to help them get fit, strong, and resilient for their adventures. 100% online. We work with people all around the country, all around the world, and you can do it absolutely anywhere. Essentially, what our packages includes is we will create a custom and personalized workout program to help prepare your body and your mind for anything the trail may throw at you, with a combination of strength training, cardio training, that hiking programming, and some recovery mobility work. We put a big emphasis in educating you around all the peripheral factors that can make or break an adventure, things like nutrition, recovery, self-care, mental strength, and a bunch of other things. And also make sure you have the coaching and support and accountability to keep you on track through all the ups and downs of life and whatever may come across your way. Now, if you did want to learn a little bit more about what we offer and how we go about things, you can go to summitstrength.com.au/online. On that page, there's a video which kind of talks through the program and sort of how we go about things. And if it was something you're interested in exploring a little bit further and just sort of seeing if it may be something you want to check out for yourself, on that page, there is a link where you can book a free call with us. We can sit down, have a really thorough chat about you, your situation, your goals, your needs, and your hiking. And if it does sort of sound like something we can potentially help you out with, we can talk you through one of our packages, which may potentially fit into your situation. So if you want to check it out, go to summitstrength.com.au/online, and then you can have a watch and potentially book a call from there. So with that being said, that is everything off my list for this presentation. I really do hope it's been helpful for a few people. There's a few things in chat, so let me just pull them up and, whoops, what's going on? And see what is going on. Okay, so does Pilates help? So Daniela, so does Pilates help the question? Like, personally, I really like Pilates. I think Pilates is a really, really, really good addition to a hiker's training program. But when we're specifically talking about what we're doing today, probably not going to make a dramatic difference, in the sense that Pilates is really, really good at working certain areas and certain muscles. But if we're looking at the hip flexors, there aren't a huge amount of Pilates moves which probably are going to hone in those hip flexors. We've got things like dead bugs and things like that where we're on our back and bringing one leg down, one leg up, but it's not really applying resistance to the hip flexors, and it probably doesn't fall into the endurance side of things either. Some reformer Pilates, maybe, because obviously you've got a bit of resistance and pulleys with reformer Pilates, but depending again on the class and this and that. So I would just say I'm a big fan of Pilates. I really, really like it. I wouldn't really sort of say it falls too much into what this specific context that we talked about today. And then Jenny's question was, with the self-massage, do you do this while still hiking or do you have to stop? Yeah, probably, you probably want to do this in your breaks. You can kind of give it a little, if you are literally hiking and moving, you can give little bits of self-massage and it sort of works a little bit, but it's what we're trying to do with the self-massage is just kind of let the area relax and chill out and calm down. And sometimes if we're doing that while we're actually moving, that muscle is actually doing stuff, it may help a little bit, but it probably won't have that opportunity to properly relax. So this is sort of something you would just sneak in if everyone's stopping and having a drink break, or if everyone's if you're sitting down for lunch or whatever it may be, or if someone's tying their shoes. I'll give you an example of this. Is I went and I did Kokoda 2018 or something like that, and on the first day I was noticing that my calves were killing me, and the guy who does all this training and tells everyone what to do, I have this bad habit of always neglecting my calves, and in hindsight, my whole training, every single time it came to my calf training, I'll be like, I don't really want to do this. I did one set or did a couple of things, and then I was like, I'll do something else. In hindsight, I really neglected my calves. So I went on the trail and I noticed that this area was getting super, super tight. And because this area was getting super, super tight, because it was massive steep descents and a lot of mud, I was like, I'm actually getting a little bit of pain in my knee because my calf is just stuck in this cramp and it's leading to a bit of pain in the knee. And I was like, this is a nightmare. This is literally what I do for a job and I'm getting this. So what I ended up doing on the first day is every single time we had a stop, I would, if we were sitting down and having a drink or having a rest, I was doing that self-massage with a water bottle. If we were just sort of standing around and having a drink, I would get my thumbs into the area and I just sort of self-managed it through the day, And then like the next day was kind of okay and like, all sort of settled. But this type of thing, you can apply it to what we've been talking about today, the hip flexors, but it's a nice thing that you can kind of self-manage a lot of aches and pains. Even if you don't really know what you're doing, just a little bit of self-massage on those areas can sometimes just get us through a tough day. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question there, Jenny. If anyone else has any other questions, we've got plenty of time. Yeah, anything else on this particular topic here, or anything else in general you're interested in, just fire away. I'm more than happy to help.
I might just come off mute and ask my question, if that's okay. So what kind of a trip or hike would benefit the most from preventing and stretching and working on your hip flexors specifically? Like, would it be a hike that's very big descents or ascents, or what kind of a style would you recommend?
Yeah, two big ones that are kind of the triggers are either ones that have a lot of ascents, so lots of stairs going up or lots of hills going up because we've got to step and step and step and step and step. Or on the flip side, ones that are really flat, but then just unconsciously we end up going a bit quicker. So this can often happen is like doing like the Caminos. Like a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, like the Caminos, like on certain days, there's not a huge amount of up and down on certain ones. And then they end up putting a big power along, and it can end up happening. So those are the two things. They're kind of like polar opposites, but they're the typical ones that we come across. Leah, Kokoda. Yeah, it's a good one. If you got that ahead, you're going to have some good fun. Just wondering if I'm identifying hip flexors accurately. Is it a sign of sore flexors when I stand for hours of heavy exercise, for example, gardening, and can't straight or walk with a roll? It could be many different things. In all honesty, like I would probably easiest way if you're trying to self-identify things is basically, again, just get your thumbs, get your fingers, and just poke around and sort of see where specifically am I sore. And just sort of take a note. And after a big day of gardening, like there may be multiple different points or whatever. And you might be like, okay, cool. Like there's like 4 or 5 things that I'm really sore with. And then typically what I would recommend, and I can't sometimes get my clients to do this just when they're doing their self-education, you can go into Google Images and just type in like muscle chart or muscles or whatever. And there'll be 1,000,001 pictures that show up with just different muscles. And essentially you can just do mix and match, or not even mix and match, what do you call it? Like connect the dots. And you'll be like, okay, I'm sore here. What is kind of that? There's a kind of line in the area. Am I sore in the front of my hips? Is that the hip flexors? That may be worthwhile, or whatever. So you may not always get 100% right, and if you do want to really hone in on that, you probably want to see a physio or someone and get them to poke around. But if you're just trying to figure it out for yourself, like we don't have to be too accurate with it. We can kind of say, hey, this is the general area. And then, I can do some stretches or I can do some strengthening, which will kind of hit that general area. Like sometimes people with their training, they kind of make things a little bit more complicated than they need to be. And you'll see things online. They'll say, hey, like to work on this really complicated muscle or this really complicated area, you have to be doing X, Y, and Z. But sometimes, in all honesty, it can be pretty basic. You just get the general area of where it is, line it up with something, and it kind of works out pretty well. So Alex, yeah, I'll sort of say play around with that. And if you want something really honed in and be like, I know exactly what's going on, exactly what's happening, probably book in with a physio and see what they have to say. And then Jennifer, do you get more benefit from massaging direct on the skin in private or over clothes? I would sort of say you probably get a little bit more benefit on direct on skin, purely for the fact that it's not like a massive difference, but like in a lot of areas that you're trying to massage, the clothes can just kind of get like in the way, basically. So in our particular example, we were talking about the hip flexors, and that's a small muscle group and you can kind of get quite pinpointed with it. Probably doesn't matter too much like direct on skin or not, because you can notice right now, if you dig your thumb into your hip flexors, you can get like a tension point there, and it's pretty easy to kind of wiggle your thumb around and work pretty well. Alternatively, if you were trying to do something like your glutes, which is a bit of a bigger muscle and can sometimes be a little bit tricky, you can kind of get into there. But sometimes if you're like wiggling around and rolling around with a ball or a bottle or a bit of trekking pole, sometimes the clothes can just get in the way and they just get tangled up and it just gets a little bit thin. So it's not really a big deal. Like, if it works for you over your clothes, absolutely. If it doesn't work for you over your clothes, then just save it for the end of the day when you're in private and give it a whirl. I think like when you're going down the route of like massage, when you're actually getting someone massaging you, obviously they've got to apply oils and that will enhance the situation. And yeah, you probably want to be like not so much over the clothes there, but what we're talking about, potato closely. And then Jenny, I did a 5-hour hike last week with a lot of ascents, and halfway through the left inside of the thigh was sore, and I'm figuring if it was hip flexor. I dug in my thumb for 10 minutes and took some pain relief. It went away after half an hour while still walking. Thanks to the magnesium spray, ideal. So yeah, so that type of stuff, really, really common. Like if it's like the inside of the thigh, depending on where it is, it could be a few different things. If it was like right up in like the inner thigh, like quite close to the hips, it could very well be the hip flexors there. Alternatively, if it was kind of like a little bit lower, it may have been one of the hip flexors because there are hip flexors attached there. It may have been something else. But again, general rule of thumb, like if you're kind of getting that type of thing, it's getting like quite tight and sore, that type of self-massage can be quite good. You can kind of play around with some stretches and they can sometimes help. And then, yeah, always have your pain relief in there, like your Panadol or whatever, and that can sometimes help, and a little bit of magnesium can go a long way as well. Other thing I didn't even mention today, hip flexors and also any other ache and pain. One of the most simple things you can do when you're on the trail, if you do start get the early inklings of something creeping on, is just pull back your pace a little bit. And the most simple thing to take pressure away from your feet, your ankles, your knees, your hip flexors, even your lower back, is just whatever pace you've been going at, pull back a little bit. If you've been going super quick and go back to your normal pace, that will help. If you've been going your normal pace and just pull it back to a little bit of a dawdle, that will help as well. It's not always possible in a situation where you may be in a group environment or with a friend or whatever it may be, but if it is possible, that is a really, really simple self-management thing. You just have to remind yourself and keep on reminding yourself to keep it slow so you don't get too carried away. But that can work out pretty well as well. Cool. Any other questions, guys, while we're here? All right. Well, I'll sort of say if there's any other questions or anything pops up, feel free to reach out, email me, come join one of our groups or whatever it may be. I'm always happy to have a chat. But aside from that, thank you as always for having me on. I really, really do appreciate getting a chance to talk about this. I always do love it. And I really do hope it does help a few people out there. And Pam, last question, is a good idea to stretch at the end of the day of walking and before? Yeah, probably. Like, it's not the end of the world if you don't, but it can be at the beginning of the day. It can be nice just to prep the body and mind to move. It's not the end of the world if you don't do it. It's not going to ruin anything because hiking is relatively low intensity, so you can kind of ease into things. At the end of the day, again, it's not going to be detrimental if you don't, but it can be quite nice just to relieve muscles that may be a little bit restless, a little bit sore, help you sleep a little bit better, help you settle and this and that. So it's not the end of the world if you miss either of them, but it can be quite nice to spend 5 minutes on each end. It can go a long way. Easy. All right. Well, on that note, yeah. No, you're right. I was just going to say goodbye. So thank you for having me on, everyone. I'm going to duck off and have a little bit of dinner. So I can't remember what I've got installed for next month, but we will all let you know for the next one. So have a lovely evening, everyone, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye.
Thanks, Rowan. See you guys. Enjoy your stretching.